Some promises are meant to be broken, especially when keeping them means denying your heart the love it was always meant to find. Picture this, a workshop filled with the scent of sawdust and dreams half finished, where golden afternoon light streams through dusty windows, illuminating a man's trembling hands as he holds a letter that changes everything. Caleb Hartwell stands frozen among his late brother's tools, reading words written in David's familiar handwriting, "Don't spend your whole life in my shadow. You deserve to be chosen first." The workshop door creaks open, and there she is, Simone, David's widow, the woman Caleb has loved silently for years. Her warm brown eyes, still red from anniversary tears, widen as she sees him there among the wood shavings and unfinished projects. The letter flutters from his calloused fingers to the floor, and when she bends to retrieve it, their worlds collide in a moment that will either destroy them or set them free. "Take care of my family," the letter continues in David's voice from beyond the grave, "but more than that, don't let guilt stop either of you from living. Love her the way she deserves, completely, honestly, without apology." Two hearts caught between honoring the past and embracing a future that feels both forbidden and destined. The scent of sawdust mixing with her perfume, the golden workshop light casting shadows that make him look like David but feel entirely like himself, the letter trembling in her hands as she realizes her late husband wanted them to find each other. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you'd risk everything, even your own happiness, to honor their memory? But what happens when honoring that memory means denying the very love they wanted you to find? If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. Hello once again, my beautiful Love Diaries family. Here we are, gathering around our virtual fireplace where hearts find healing through the stories we share. This sacred space we've created together, it's more than just a channel, isn't it? It's become a place where souls recognize souls, where your comments and connections provide the warmth that keeps these love stories burning bright. Every time I read your messages, sharing your own journeys of love found, love lost, and love discovered in the most unexpected places, my heart swells with gratitude. You inspire these stories, beautiful ones. Your courage to love again, to trust again, to open your hearts despite the risks, that's the real magic we explore here. I'm curious, where in this beautiful world are you watching from today? Whether you're in a bustling city where love stories unfold on every corner, or a quiet village where hearts beat just as passionately, drop your location in the comments below. Tonight's story will take you on an emotional journey that might just crack your heart wide open before it pieces it back together in the most beautiful way. We're diving deep into the complex territory of second chances, forbidden attractions, and the kind of love that honors the past by courageously embracing the future. This isn't just about romance, though the passion will leave you breathless. This is about the transformative power of love to heal generational wounds, to teach children that families can grow in magnificent ways, and to show us that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is allowing ourselves to live fully. Get ready for a story about guilt becoming grace, duty transforming into desire, and two souls discovering that love doesn't replace, it multiplies, it transforms, it finds new ways to flourish even in the shadow of profound loss. Chapter 1. The morning sun streaked through the windows of St. Mary's Children's Hospital, casting rainbow prisms across the pediatric ward where Simone Hartwell moved with the graceful efficiency of someone who had found her calling early and never looked back. Her scrubs, decorated with tiny cartoon animals, couldn't disguise the exhaustion in her warm brown eyes, an exhaustion that had nothing to do with her 12-hour shifts and everything to do with the relentless weight of single motherhood. "Mrs. Patterson's little one is asking for you again," Amanda Foster, her supervisor, mentioned as Simone charted medications at the nurse's station. "Something about the nice lady who doesn't make the shots hurt." Simone smiled, the first genuine one of the morning. "Tommy's a sweetheart. Just needs someone to explain what's happening instead of rushing through procedures." She glanced at the clock. I've got 20 minutes before rounds. Perfect timing. As she walked toward Tommy's room, Simone's phone buzzed with a text from her mother-in-law, Sophia here. Sunday dinner at 2 p.m. Don't be late. The children need family structure. The message made Simone's shoulders tense. 2 years since David's sudden heart attack, and Sophia still spoke to her like a child who couldn't manage alone. Maybe because some days, Simone felt exactly like that. In Tommy's room, she knelt beside the 6-year-old's bed, her voice soft and melodic. Hey there, buddy. I hear you're worried about your medicine today. Tommy's eyes, so like her own Mason's, filled with tears. It's gonna hurt, and my mommy had to go to work. She wanted to stay, but sometimes mommies have to do hard things to take care of their babies, Simone finished gently, thinking of her own morning rush to get Celeste and Mason ready for school before her shift. You know what? I'm a mommy too, and I promise I'll stay right here with you. We'll count to 10 together, and before we get to 5, it'll be all done. As she administered Tommy's 4 medication with practiced care, Simone felt the familiar ache in her chest. David used to tease her about bringing every patient's story home, about how she'd worry over children who weren't even hers while sometimes barely having energy left for their own. You have the biggest heart I've ever seen, he'd say, pulling her close after particularly difficult shifts. But don't forget to save some of that care for yourself, beautiful. If only it were that simple. 2 hours later, Simone pulled into her driveway to find Caleb's pickup truck already parked under the oak tree David had planted when Celeste was born. Her heart did that peculiar flutter it had been doing lately whenever she saw signs of his presence, a reaction that filled her with equal parts warmth and guilt. Caleb Hartwell looked enough like his older brother to stop her breath sometimes, but where David had been all sharp angles and restless energy, Caleb possessed a quiet strength that settled into spaces like morning sunlight. His green eyes held depths David's ambitious blue ones had never quite achieved, and his hands, those capable, gentle hands, spoke of a man who built things to last rather than just to impress. She found him in her kitchen, sleeves rolled up, installing a new faucet while 12-year-old Celeste sat at the counter doing homework and 8-year-old Mason played with Lego blocks at his feet. Uncle Caleb, look! Mason held up an elaborate spaceship. It's got laser cannons and everything. That's incredible, buddy. Caleb's voice carried genuine enthusiasm as he tested the water pressure. What's its mission? To protect the galaxy from bad guys who try to hurt families. The innocent words hung in the air with unexpected weight. Simone watched Caleb's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, a reaction she'd noticed whenever the children mentioned protection or safety. As if he felt personally responsible for every threat they might face. Mom. Celeste looked up from her math homework with relief. Uncle Caleb said he'd help me with these word problems after he finished fixing the sink. They're about calculating distances, and I just don't get it. Uncle Caleb's good at explaining things, Simone said, setting down her purse and trying not to notice how perfectly he fit into their domestic routine. Better than I am with math, anyway. You're good at everything, Mom, Mason declared loyally, but then added with 8-year-old honesty, except fixing stuff that breaks. Caleb caught her eye over Mason's head, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of all the broken things in their lives that couldn't be repaired with tools from a hardware store. Your mom's the strongest person I know, Caleb said quietly, his words meant for the children but his gaze steady on Simone's face. She takes care of sick kids all day, then comes home and takes care of you too. That's superhero-level strength right there. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. When was the last time someone had seen her struggles and called her strong instead of asking why she couldn't manage better? The faucet should work perfectly now, Caleb said, wiping his hands on a dish towel. No more dripping to keep you awake at night. Thank you. The words felt inadequate for everything he'd done, not just today, but every day for 2 years. You don't have to keep. Yes, I do. The quiet intensity in his voice stopped her protest. David asked me to take care of his family. That's not a burden, Simone. It's an honor. Their eyes held for a moment too long, and Simone felt heat rise in her cheeks. This was David's brother. Her children's uncle. The man who dropped everything to help her navigate widowhood without ever asking for anything in return. So why did her pulse quicken every time he said her name like that, soft, with a reverence that made her feel precious instead of pitiable? Speaking of family, she said, forcing lightness into her voice, Sophia expects us at 2 for Sunday dinner. Fair warning, she's been in full grandmother mode lately. Caleb's expression darkened slightly. What's she saying now? Nothing specific. Just, you know how she gets. Questions about whether I'm managing properly, suggestions about what David would want for the children. Simone lowered her voice. Sometimes I think she forgets that I was his wife for 8 years. I knew what he wanted. Did you? The question slipped out before Caleb could stop it, and immediately his face flushed. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. It's okay. But it wasn't, really. Because lately, Simone had been wondering the same thing. Had she really known David as well as she thought? Or had she been so busy being the perfect wife and mother that she'd missed the deeper currents running beneath their seemingly stable life? Mom, can Uncle Caleb sit next to me at Grandma Sophia's? Mason asked, oblivious to the adult undercurrents. He tells the best stories about when Daddy was little. Of course, sweetie. Simone ruffled his hair, grateful for the interruption. Why don't you go get cleaned up? We need to leave in an hour. As the children scattered to their rooms, Simone found herself alone with Caleb in the sudden quiet of her kitchen. He was gathering his tools, movements efficient but unhurried, and she noticed, not for the first time, how his presence seemed to calm the chaotic energy that usually filled their house. Caleb? She touched his arm lightly, then immediately pulled back when he stilled under her fingers. Thank you. For everything. I know this isn't. I know you didn't sign up for Sunday dinners and broken faucets when David asked you to watch out for us. He turned to face her fully, and the expression in his green eyes made her breath catch. Simone, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. These kids, you're not an obligation. He stopped himself, jaw working as if fighting words that wanted to escape. We're what? She whispered. For a heartbeat, the air between them crackled with possibility. Then Caleb stepped back, the moment shattering like glass. Your family, he said firmly. That's all David ever wanted, for his family to be safe and loved. But as he gathered his tools and headed for the door, Simone couldn't shake the feeling that there had been other words hovering in the space between them. Words that felt dangerous and necessary and completely impossible. I want to hear from your hearts. Have you ever found yourself caring for someone in a way that surprised you? Maybe it started as friendship or family support, but grew into something deeper? Share your story in the comments below, because your experiences help all of us understand the beautiful complexity of human connection. Chapter 2. Sunday dinner at Sophia Hartwell's house had always been a production, but since David's death, it had become something closer to a performance. The dining room table, set with her mother-in-law's best china, felt like a shrine to everything Simone was supposedly failing to maintain. Celeste, sit up straight, darling, Sophia instructed as she served pot roast that smelled exactly like the ones David used to rave about. Your father always had perfect posture. It's important to maintain standards. Simone watched her 12-year-old daughter unconsciously straighten her spine and felt the familiar stab of inadequacy. No matter how hard she tried, she would never be the kind of woman who could make Sunday dinner feel effortless, who remembered to iron cloth napkins and polish silver until it gleamed. The roast is delicious, Sophia, Caleb said from his place across the table, the chair that had been David's but somehow looked right with Caleb sitting there now. You'll have to give me the recipe. Oh, you don't cook, dear, Sophia waved dismissively. That's what wives are for. The comment landed like a small bomb in the center of the table. Simone felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Caleb's voice cut through the awkward silence. Actually, I've been learning. Jake's been teaching me some basics. His green eyes found Simone's across the table. A man should be able to take care of himself and help take care of others. There was something in the way he said others that made Simone's pulse quicken. As if he wasn't talking about cooking in general, but about cooking for someone specific. Uncle Caleb makes the best grilled cheese, Mason piped up loyally. He cuts them into triangles and everything. And he helps with my math homework better than anybody, Celeste added. He explains things so I actually understand instead of just getting frustrated. Sophia's lips pursed slightly. Well, of course, family helps family. That's what David would expect. She turned to Simone with that particular smile that always made Simone feel like she was being measured and found wanting. Speaking of which, dear, Mrs. Henderson mentioned she saw you at the hospital charity gala last month. With Caleb. The way she said his name made it sound vaguely scandalous. Simone felt her cheeks burn brighter. Caleb was kind enough to escort me since I needed to attend for work, Simone said carefully. It seemed practical to go together rather than driving separately. Practical, Sophia repeated, as if the word tasted sour. Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe it. Under the table, Simone felt her hands clench into fists. She was 32 years old, a grown woman with a career and 2 children, and yet Sophia could still make her feel like a teenager caught breaking curfew. Grandma, why are you using your mean voice? Mason asked with 8-year-old directness. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sophia's face softened immediately when she looked at her grandson, but Simone caught the flash of something harder in her eyes. I'm not using a mean voice, sweetheart. I'm just concerned about appearances. Your father had certain expectations about how his family should conduct themselves. David expected his family to be happy, Caleb said quietly, but with steel beneath the words. That was always his priority. The two statements faced off across the dinner table like opposing armies. Simone felt caught in the middle, as she so often did these days, between her mother-in-law's expectations and her own growing need to live instead of just survive. After dinner, while Sophia entertained the children with photo albums full of David's childhood pictures, Simone found herself on the back porch with Caleb, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. I'm sorry about that, she said quietly. Sophia means well, but she's forgotten that you're not just David's widow, Caleb finished. You're a person with your own life to live. The observation was so accurate, so precisely what she'd been feeling but couldn't articulate, that tears pricked her eyes. Sometimes I feel like I died with him, she admitted. Like I'm just going through the motions of being alive. Caleb turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. You're the most alive person I know, Simone. The way you care for those kids at the hospital, the way you love Celeste and Mason, the way you fight every day to keep this family together, that's not going through motions. That's courage. It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like barely hanging on most days. Maybe that's what courage looks like, he said softly. Not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The evening air carried the scent of Sophia's rose garden and something else, the clean, masculine smell of Caleb's cologne mixed with the lingering trace of sawdust that seemed to follow him everywhere. Caleb? Simone's voice was barely above a whisper. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life instead of your own? The question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Every day, he said finally. For 34 years, I've been David's younger brother. The backup plan. The one who stays in the shadows while he shines. His voice dropped lower. Even now, after he's gone, I'm still just filling in. Still not quite enough. The pain in his words made her chest tight. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm. That's not true. Isn't it? He looked down at her hand on his arm, and she saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. I'm here because David asked me to be. I fix your faucets and help with homework and attend hospital galas because that's what he would have done if he were still alive. And you think that's the only reason I want you here? The question escaped before she could stop it, loaded with implications that made them both freeze. Caleb's eyes searched her face in the gathering darkness. Is it? The honest answer terrified her. Because no, it wasn't. Somewhere along the way, his quiet presence had become as essential to her daily rhythm as breathing. She looked forward to his texts checking on her after difficult shifts. She found excuses to call him when things broke that she could probably fix herself. She lay awake at night remembering the way he'd looked at her across crowded rooms, as if she were someone worth seeing. But admitting any of that felt like betraying David's memory, like proving Sophia's unspoken accusations right. She started, then stopped. It's complicated. Mom? Uncle Caleb? Celeste's voice called from inside the house. Grandma wants to know if you want coffee. The spell between them broke. Caleb stepped back, putting proper distance between them once again. We should go in, he said, his voice carefully neutral. But as they walked back toward the house, Simone couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been on the verge of something important. Something that scared her as much as it thrilled her. 3 days later, Simone arrived home from her evening shift to find her kitchen cabinet door hanging at an awkward angle, one hinge completely torn from the wood. The sight of it, like everything else that had broken since David died, filled her with a familiar mixture of frustration and defeat. She'd asked the landlord to fix it months ago. Had watched YouTube videos trying to figure out how to do it herself. Had even bought the necessary tools, which now sat unused in David's toolbox in the garage because every time she opened it, the smell of his cologne on the leather tool belt made her cry. Mom? Mason appeared in the doorway, still in his dinosaur pajamas. Why are you making that face? What face? She tried to arrange her expression into something less catastrophic. The face you make when stuff breaks and you miss Daddy. Out of the mouths of babes. Her 8-year-old son had become far too good at reading her moods. It's just the cabinet, sweetie. Nothing that can't be fixed. Eventually. By someone who actually knew what they were doing. Should I call Uncle Caleb? He's good at fixing things. The innocent suggestion made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with broken cabinets. It's almost 9 o'clock, Mason. Too late to bother Uncle Caleb with something this small. But as she struggled with the stubborn door, trying to lift it back into place while simultaneously attempting to line up the screw holes, her frustration mounted. This was exactly the kind of task David would have handled in 5 minutes, probably while carrying on a conversation and making her laugh. The cabinet door slipped from her grip and crashed to the floor, taking a ceramic mug with it. Damn it! The words escaped before she could stop them. Mom said a bad word, Mason announced to his sister, who appeared in the kitchen doorway with perfect timing. Mom's allowed to say bad words sometimes, Celeste said with 12-year-old wisdom. Especially when things are being stupid and not working right. Simone looked at her children, these amazing little humans who'd been so patient with her grief, so understanding when she cried at random moments or forgot to pack their lunch money, and felt the familiar weight of trying to be everything they needed. You know what? She said, pulling out her phone. Maybe I will call Uncle Caleb. Just to ask for advice. But when Caleb answered on the second ring, his voice warm with concern when he heard hers, asking for advice turned into admitting defeat, which somehow became him showing up at her door 20 minutes later with his toolbox and a gentle smile that made her chest tight. You didn't have to come over, she said as he examined the broken hinge. I could have figured it out eventually. I know you could have. His fingers traced the splintered wood where the screw had pulled free. But you don't have to figure everything out alone, Simone. The way he said her name, soft, with careful reverence, made something flutter in her stomach. She watched his hands as he worked, noting the small scar across his left knuckle, the calluses that spoke of honest labor, the gentle precision with which he handled even this simple repair. Hold the flashlight right there, he instructed, and she moved closer, close enough to catch his scent, that intoxicating mixture of sawdust and cologne that had begun to mean safety and comfort in her mind. Their fingers brushed as she adjusted her grip on the flashlight, and she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the tool in her hand. Caleb's movement stilled for just a moment, and when she glanced at his face, she found his green eyes focused intently on her face rather than his work. Simone, he said quietly, and her name sounded different in his voice. Not like David's sister-in-law. Not like the mother of his nephews. Like a woman worth looking at, worth wanting. The cabinet door that had defeated her earlier yielded immediately to his patient touch. He tested it once, twice, ensuring it opened and closed smoothly. There, he said, but neither of them moved away from their close proximity. Good as new. Thank you. The words came out breathier than she intended. I don't know what I'd do without. You'd figure it out, he interrupted gently. You always do. You're stronger than you think, Simone. But she didn't feel strong. Standing there in her kitchen, close enough to see the gold flecks in his green eyes, close enough to notice the way his gaze dropped briefly to her lips before snapping back up, she felt anything but strong. She felt awakened. Alive in a way she hadn't been in 2 years. And terrified by the intensity of that awakening. I should let you get home, she said, stepping back reluctantly. It's getting late. Yeah. But he didn't move immediately. Simone? If you need anything, anything at all, call me. Day or night. I mean that. I know you do. And that was part of what scared her. The absolute certainty that Caleb Hartwell would drop everything to help her, would show up at her door with tools and gentle hands and patient understanding, asking for nothing in return except the chance to make her life a little easier. When was the last time someone had taken care of her instead of the other way around? After he left, Simone stood in her kitchen testing the repaired cabinet door over and over, marveling at how smoothly it opened and closed. Such a simple fix, but it represented something larger, the way Caleb seemed to repair things in her life she hadn't even realized were broken. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment when their fingers had touched, when his eyes had lingered on her face, when the air between them had crackled with possibility. She was David's widow. Caleb was David's brother. What she was feeling, what they both seemed to be feeling, was impossible. Wasn't it? But as sleep finally claimed her, her last conscious thought was of gentle green eyes and capable hands, and the way her name sounded like something precious when Caleb whispered it in the quiet of her kitchen. Chapter 3. The thunderstorm hit on a Tuesday night in October, arriving with the sudden fury that only autumn storms could muster. Simone had just settled into bed when the first crack of thunder sent Mason running down the hallway, his bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. Mom! His voice was thick with tears and terror. The lightning's trying to get in my room. She gathered him into her arms, feeling his small body trembling against hers. It's okay, baby. It's just noise. The lightning can't hurt you inside the house. But Mason wasn't convinced. He'd been having nightmares since David's death, not every night, but often enough that Simone had learned to recognize the signs. Storms were one of his biggest triggers, though she'd never fully understood why until tonight. Daddy always came when it stormed, Mason sobbed against her shoulder. He used to tell me stories about thunder being the sky's way of laughing, and lightning being its way of taking pictures of all the beautiful things on earth. Simone's heart broke a little more. She'd forgotten about David's elaborate storm mythology, the way he transformed scary weather into magical adventures. Another small tradition lost in the overwhelming grief of daily survival. "I can tell you those stories," she offered, but Mason shook his head. "It's not the same. You don't remember them right." Before she could respond, another crash of thunder shook the house, followed immediately by a brilliant flash of lightning that illuminated Mason's tear-streaked face. This time, he screamed, a sound of pure terror that brought Celeste running from her room. "What's wrong with Mason?" Celeste asked, her own voice shaky with sleep and concern. "Just scared of the storm," Simone said, but even as she spoke, Mason's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow in a way that made her nurse's instincts kick into high alert. "Mason, honey, I need you to breathe with me. In through your nose, out through your mouth." But he was too far gone, lost in whatever nightmare the storm had triggered. His small hands clutched at her pajama top as if he were drowning and she was the only thing keeping him afloat. Simone felt her own panic rising. She'd handled medical emergencies with children at the hospital, but this was different. This was her baby, falling apart in her arms, and she felt helpless to fix it. Without really thinking about it, she reached for her phone and dialed Caleb's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice instantly alert despite the late hour. "Simone? What's wrong?" "I'm sorry to call so late, but Mason, there's a storm, and he's having some kind of panic attack, and I don't know what to do." The words tumbled out in a rush. "He's asking for David, and I can't. I don't remember the stories David used to tell about storms, and..." "I'm on my way," Caleb said simply. 10 minutes. "Caleb, you don't have to. I'm already in my truck." The line went dead, and Simone felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. Help was coming. Caleb was coming. True to his word, he appeared at her front door in exactly 10 minutes, rain-soaked and breathless as if he'd run from his truck to her porch. He still wore his work clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt that clung to his broad shoulders, and his dark hair was damp with rain. "Where is he?" Caleb asked without preamble. "Living room. He's pretty upset." Caleb found Mason curled in the corner of the couch, still sobbing and shaking. Without hesitation, he sat down and opened his arms. "Hey there, buddy. I hear the sky's putting on quite a show tonight." Mason looked up, his face streaked with tears but his breathing starting to slow at the sound of Caleb's calm voice. "Uncle Caleb? Why are you here?" "Your mom called because she thought you might want to hear some stories about storms. And you know what? I remember every single one your dad used to tell." Mason moved tentatively into Caleb's embrace, and Simone watched in amazement as her son's rigid posture began to relax. "Really? You remember about the thunder laughing?" "Oh, I remember way more than that," Caleb said, settling Mason more comfortably against his chest. "Did your dad ever tell you about the lightning photographers?" Mason shook his head, but his eyes were bright with interest now instead of fear. "Well, it's a very exclusive club," Caleb began, his voice taking on the storyteller cadence that David had perfected. "They live in the clouds, and their job is to take pictures of all the most beautiful moments happening on Earth. Every time you see lightning, that's their camera flash." As Caleb spun an elaborate tale about cloud-dwelling photographers who captured images of children laughing, families hugging, and dogs playing in puddles, Simone found herself sitting on the floor beside the couch, mesmerized not just by the story but by the gentle way Caleb held her son. His large hand stroked Mason's hair with infinite tenderness, and his voice remained steady and soothing even when thunder crashed overhead. This was what Mason needed, not just the stories, but the solid presence of someone who could remain calm in the storm. Someone who could be what David had been, but in his own quiet way. "And that's why storms are actually good luck," Caleb concluded as the thunder began to fade into the distance. "Because it means the lightning photographers thought your day was beautiful enough to capture forever." Mason was almost asleep now, his breathing deep and even against Caleb's chest. "Uncle Caleb?" "Yeah, buddy? Will you stay until the storm is over?" Caleb's eyes met Simone's over Mason's head, and she saw her own emotional turmoil reflected there. This felt too natural, too right. Like a family settling in for the night. "Of course I'll stay," Caleb said softly. It took another hour to get Mason fully settled back in his own bed, with Caleb checking all the windows to show him that the lightning couldn't get inside and promising to stay in the house until morning. When they finally tucked him in, Mason was smiling sleepily. "Thanks, Uncle Caleb. You're almost as good at storm stories as Daddy was." "Almost?" Caleb pretended to be offended. "I'll have to work on that." Mason giggled, the first truly happy sound Simone had heard from him in weeks. Back in the living room, Simone and Caleb found themselves alone with the sound of rain pattering against the windows and the low rumble of distant thunder. Celeste had returned to her room hours ago, and the house felt wrapped in intimate quiet. "Thank you," Simone said, the words inadequate for what he'd just done. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come." "You would have figured it out," Caleb said, but there was something different in his voice now. Rougher, weighted with emotion he was trying to contain. "You always do." "No." The word escaped before Simone could stop it, fierce and final. "No, I don't always figure it out. I'm drowning half the time, Caleb. Pretending I know what I'm doing when really I'm just barely keeping my head above water." The admission hung between them like a confession. Simone wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware that she was standing in her living room in thin pajamas, having just revealed more vulnerability than she'd shown anyone since David's funeral. "Tonight, when Mason was falling apart and I couldn't help him. I felt like such a failure as a mother." Her voice cracked. David would have known exactly what to do. He would have remembered the stories, known how to calm him down. I'm not enough for them." "Stop." Caleb's voice was sharp enough to cut through her self-recrimination. "Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare diminish what you do every single day." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the intensity burning in his green eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I see a woman who works 12-hour shifts taking care of other people's children, then comes home and gives everything she has left to her own kids. I see someone who's been carrying the weight of this family alone for 2 years and still finds ways to smile, to laugh, to make Mason and Celeste feel safe and loved." Tears she'd been holding back for weeks, months, began to spill down her cheeks. "But I can't be everything they need. I can't be their father." "They don't need you to be their father," Caleb said, and suddenly his hands were on her shoulders, warm and steady and real. "They need you to be their mother. And you're the best mother those kids could ever ask for." The tenderness in his voice undid her completely. The sobs she'd been suppressing since Mason's first scream came pouring out, not the controlled tears she allowed herself in private, but raw, body-shaking cries that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. Caleb didn't hesitate. He pulled her against him, one hand stroking her hair while the other held her steady as 2 years of grief and exhaustion and overwhelming responsibility finally found their release. "I've got you," he murmured against her temple. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore. I've got you." And for the first time since David's death, Simone allowed herself to truly lean on someone else. Caleb's chest was solid and warm beneath her cheek, his arms strong enough to hold her weight when her own legs felt too shaky to support her. The scent of rain and sawdust and something uniquely him enveloped her like a cocoon. "I'm so tired," she whispered against his shirt. "I'm just so tired of being strong all the time." "Then don't be. Not tonight." His voice rumbled through his chest, vibrating against her ear. "Tonight, let me be strong enough for both of us." They stood like that for long minutes, swaying slightly as thunder rolled overhead and rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows. Simone felt something shifting inside her chest, a loosening of the tight control she'd maintained for so long, a recognition that this man holding her wasn't David, wasn't trying to be David, but was something else entirely. Something she needed in ways she was only beginning to understand. When her tears finally slowed, she became acutely aware of their position. Her body pressed against his hands tangled in her hair, the steady rhythm of his breathing beneath her cheek. She should pull away. Should put proper distance between them. Instead, she lifted her head to look at him. His green eyes were dark with emotion, his face closer than it had ever been. She could see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, could count the gold flecks in his irises, could feel his breath warm against her lips. "Simone," he said, and her name sounded different in his voice. Not like David's sister-in-law. Not like his nephew's mother. Like a woman. Like someone worth wanting. "I know this is wrong," she whispered. "I know we shouldn't. Tell me to leave." His voice was hoarse with restraint. "Tell me to go home and forget this happened, and I will." But she couldn't. The words stuck in her throat because leaving was the last thing she wanted him to do. She wanted him to stay, wanted to explore this feeling that had been building between them for months, wanted to understand why his touch felt like coming home instead of betraying a memory. "I can't," she admitted. "I can't tell you to leave because I don't want you to go." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, hope, and a heat that made her stomach flutter with anticipation. Simone. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But for the first time in 2 years, I feel alive. When I'm with you, I remember who I used to be before I became just a widow, just a single mother struggling to hold everything together." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek, wiping away the last of her tears. "You're not just anything. You're extraordinary." The compliment, delivered with such quiet conviction, made her breath catch. When was the last time someone had looked at her like this? Like she was beautiful instead of broken, desirable instead of desperate? "This is complicated," she said, but she didn't pull away from his touch. "I know." His forehead rested against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "I've been fighting this for so long, Simone. Trying to do the right thing, trying to honor David's memory, trying not to want what I can't have." "What do you want?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His answer was immediate, raw with honesty. "You. I want you. I've wanted you since before David died, and I've hated myself for it every single day since." The confession hit her like a physical blow. "Before? Not like this," he said quickly. "Never like this while he was alive. I would never have. But seeing you at family dinners, watching you with the kids, listening to you talk about your work. There was always something there, something I buried so deep I almost convinced myself it didn't exist." Simone stared at him, processing this revelation. Caleb had wanted her while David was alive? Had hidden those feelings, been honorable and loyal and good, even while nursing an impossible attraction? "I should feel guilty about that," she said slowly. "I should be horrified or angry or something." "And do you? Feel guilty?" She searched her heart for the shame she expected to find, the outrage at discovering her brother-in-law had harbored romantic feelings for her. Instead, she found something else entirely. Relief. Relief that she wasn't going crazy. Relief that this electricity between them was real and mutual and had deeper roots than grief-fueled desperation. "No," she whispered. "I don't feel guilty. I feel understood. Like I'm not alone in this confusion." They were so close now that she could see her own reflection in his eyes, could feel the tension coiled in his muscles as he fought for control. "We can't," he said, but his hands were still framing her face, his thumbs still tracing gentle patterns across her cheekbones. I know. But even as she said it, she was rising on her toes, drawn by a force stronger than logic or propriety or the voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like Sophia's disapproval. The kiss, when it finally happened, was inevitable as sunrise. Soft at first, tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Simone had been starving for this kind of connection without even realizing it, and the moment their lips met, something inside her caught fire. She kissed him back with 2 years of loneliness and need, with the desperation of someone who'd been merely surviving finally remembering what it felt like to live. His response was immediate and overwhelming, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pressed against the small of her back, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. This wasn't David's kiss. David had been all passion and urgency, taking what he wanted with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in her heart. Caleb kissed her like she was precious, like he couldn't quite believe she was real, like he wanted to memorize every second in case it never happened again. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Simone's hands had somehow found their way to his chest, could feel his heart racing beneath her palms. God, Caleb breathed, resting his forehead against hers again. Simone, Don't, she interrupted, knowing whatever he was about to say would be reasonable and noble and would probably convince them both that this had been a mistake. Don't think. Not tonight. But even as she said it, reality was creeping back in. They were standing in her living room, David's living room, kissing like teenagers while her children slept upstairs. This was reckless and complicated and potentially devastating for everyone involved. The kids, she said reluctantly. Are asleep, he finished, but he stepped back anyway, putting proper distance between them. And you're right. We need to think about what this means. What it meant was that she was falling for her dead husband's brother. What it meant was that everything was about to get infinitely more complicated. What it meant was that for the first time in 2 years, she felt like a woman instead of just a mother and widow. I should go, Caleb said, but he made no move toward the door. You promised Mason you'd stay until morning. A smile ghosted across his lips. I did, didn't I? The couch pulls out into a bed, she offered, then immediately blushed at the implications. I mean, if you're going to stay, you should be comfortable. Simone. Her name was both question and statement, loaded with everything they weren't saying. Just to sleep, she clarified quickly. We both need to think about this. About what happens next. He nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on her face as if he were memorizing it. What happens next? I don't know, she admitted. But whatever it is, we figure it out together. No more carrying everything alone. The promise hung between them like a bridge, fragile and untested, but offering passage from the isolation they'd both been living into something that might be beautiful if they were brave enough to cross it. Outside, the storm was finally moving on, thunder fading to distant rumbles. But inside Simone's living room, something entirely new was just beginning. Chapter 4. The next morning brought autumn sunshine and the inevitable awkwardness of navigating new territory. Simone woke to the sound of laughter from downstairs, Mason's delighted giggles mixing with Celeste's more sophisticated chuckles and underneath it all, Caleb's warm rumble of amusement. She found them in the kitchen, where Caleb was flipping pancakes with theatrical flair while the children cheered each successful flip. He'd rolled up the sleeves of yesterday's flannel shirt, and his hair was mussed from sleep, but he looked perfectly at home in her kitchen. Too perfectly at home. Mom. Mason spotted her first. Uncle Caleb makes pancakes in shapes. Look, this one's a dinosaur. Indeed, the pancake on Mason's plate bore a vague resemblance to a brontosaurus, complete with a long tail made of drizzled batter. That's amazing, Simone said, acutely aware of Caleb's eyes on her. You didn't have to make breakfast. Wanted to, he said simply, and something in his tone made her stomach flutter with the memory of last night's kiss. Coffee's fresh. Their fingers brushed as he handed her a mug, and the small contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. From the way his breath caught, she knew he felt it too. "So," Celeste said with the perfect timing of a preteen who sensed adult secrets, "Uncle Caleb stayed over because of the storm?" "That's right," Simone said carefully. Mason was scared, and Uncle Caleb helped calm him down. With the lightning photographer stories, Mason added importantly. "And he stayed all night to make sure they didn't try to come inside." Celeste rolled her eyes with 12-year-old sophistication. "Lightning can't come inside, Mason. It's just electricity in the sky." "But it could if it really wanted to," Mason insisted. "That's why we needed Uncle Caleb to guard the house." Over the children's heads, Simone met Caleb's amused gaze. This domestic scene felt dangerous in its normalcy. Too easy to imagine it happening every morning, too comfortable to be healthy for any of them. After breakfast, as Caleb gathered his keys to leave, Celeste asked the question Simone had been dreading. "Uncle Caleb, why don't you just live here? You're here all the time anyway, and Mason always sleeps better when you're around." The innocent suggestion hung in the air like a landmine. Simone felt heat rise in her cheeks as she searched for an appropriate response. "Well," Caleb said carefully, "your mom and we're family, but we're not that kind of family. I have my own house, and your mom has hers." "But what if you got married?" Mason asked with 8-year-old logic. "Then you could live here and be our dad." The word dad hit like a physical blow. Simone saw Caleb flinch, saw the complicated mix of longing and guilt that crossed his features. We're not. Simone fumbled for words. "Uncle Caleb will always be your uncle, sweetheart. That's a very special relationship all by itself." But the damage was done. The children had given voice to the possibility that had been hovering unspoken between the adults, and now it couldn't be taken back. After Caleb left and the kids were settled with Saturday morning cartoons, Simone found herself staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to reconcile the woman who'd kissed her brother-in-law last night with the mother who'd just deflected her children's innocent questions about marriage. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Shelby. "Coffee date this afternoon? You've been mysteriously unavailable lately." Simone stared at the message, knowing she needed to talk to someone but uncertain how much she was ready to reveal. Shelby had been her anchor through David's death and the difficult months that followed, but this felt too fragile to examine under someone else's scrutiny. Still, isolation wasn't the answer either. 2:00, she texted back. "And yes, you can babysit while I have a small crisis." The coffee shop downtown was busy with Saturday afternoon regulars, providing enough ambient noise for a private conversation. Shelby took one look at Simone's face and ordered them both large coffees with extra shots. "Okay," Shelby said without preamble once they were settled in a corner booth. "What's going on? You look like someone who's been kissed and is trying to pretend it didn't happen. Sometimes having a best friend who'd known you since college was a disadvantage." "That obvious?" Simone asked weakly. "To me? Absolutely. To the rest of the world? Probably not. So who was it? Please tell me you're finally dating again." Simone wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, using the warmth to ground herself. "It's complicated. The best ones usually are. Come on, give me details. I've been waiting 2 years for you to show interest in anyone." "It's Caleb." The words hung between them like a confession. Shelby's eyebrows shot up, and Simone could practically see her friend's mind racing through the implications. "Caleb as in David's brother Caleb?" "Yes." "Holy shit, Simone. I know. I mean, holy shit. I know." Shelby sat back in her chair, processing. "Okay. Tell me everything. And I mean everything." So Simone did. She told her about the gradual shift in her feelings, about the way Caleb had become essential to her daily life, about last night's storm and Mason's panic and the way Caleb had appeared like a guardian angel. She told her about the kiss that had felt like coming home and the confusion that had followed. And the worst part, Simone finished, is that it doesn't feel wrong. It should feel wrong, shouldn't it? He's David's brother. But when I'm with him, I feel like myself again. Like the woman I was before I became just a widow and single mother. Shelby was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you love him? The question hit like a punch to the solar plexus. Love? She hadn't allowed herself to think in those terms yet. Simone started, then stopped. I care about him. I depend on him. I look forward to seeing him every day. When he looks at me, I feel beautiful instead of broken. That sounds like love to me. But what about David? What about loyalty and respect, Anne? David's been gone for 2 years, Shelby interrupted gently. And from everything you've told me about him, he loved you enough to want you to be happy. He loved those kids enough to want them to have a father figure. If that person happens to be his brother, maybe that's not betrayal. Maybe that's blessing. The words echoed what Caleb had said about David wanting his family to be happy, but hearing them from her best friend made them feel more real somehow. Sophia would have a stroke, Simone said weakly. Sophia's opinion stopped mattering the day you became a widow, Shelby said firmly. She had her chance to be a wife and mother. This is your chance. Don't let someone else's expectations keep you from living your life. And the kids? What if this ruins their relationship with Caleb if things don't work out? What if it gives them the father they need if things do work out? Shelby countered. Simone, those kids adore Caleb. They already see him as a father figure. Making it official might be the most natural thing in the world for them. Simone thought about Mason's innocent question that morning, about Celeste's practical observation that Caleb was already there all the time anyway. Maybe her children were wiser than she was giving them credit for. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. That means it matters. The question is, are you more scared of taking the risk or of spending the rest of your life wondering what might have been? That evening, after the children were in bed, Simone found herself pacing her living room with nervous energy. Every time she looked at the couch where she and Caleb had kissed the night before, her stomach fluttered with a mixture of desire and anxiety. Her phone rang, and Caleb's name appeared on the screen. She'd been expecting this call. They needed to talk about what had happened, about what it meant, about where they went from here. Hi, she said, aware that even that simple word sounded breathless. Hi. His voice was warm but careful. How are you doing today? After last night, I mean. Confused. Scared. But not sorry. The honesty surprised her. You? The same. There was a pause. Simone, we need to talk. Really talk. About what this means for the kids, for the family, for everything. I know. When? Tomorrow? After the kids are settled? I could come over, or we could meet somewhere neutral if that's easier. The thought of having this conversation in public made her cringe. Here is fine. The kids usually crash early on Sundays. Okay. I'll see you then. But before he could hang up, she found herself saying, Caleb? I talked to Shelby today. About us. And? She thinks David would want us to be happy. She thinks maybe this isn't betrayal, maybe it's blessing. The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. I hope she's right, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Because I don't think I can go back to pretending I don't feel this way about you. Then don't, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. Don't pretend anymore. Sunday dinner at Sophia's house felt like walking through a minefield. Every innocent comment seemed loaded with hidden meaning, Every glance between Simone and Caleb felt magnified under Sophia's watchful gaze. "You look tired, dear," Sophia observed as she served pot roast that looked identical to last week's. "Are you getting enough rest?" "I'm fine," Simone said, but she could feel Caleb's eyes on her from across the table. "Perhaps you need help managing your schedule. Single motherhood is such a burden. I've been thinking you might benefit from some guidance," David always said. "Mom." Caleb's voice cut through Sophia's monologue with quiet authority. "Simone is doing an incredible job with the kids. They're happy, healthy, and well-adjusted. That's what David would care about." Sophia's lips pursed in disapproval. "Of course, but appearances matter too. People talk, especially when they see a young widow spending so much time with family members who aren't necessarily appropriate companions." The comment landed like a slap. Simone felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Celeste piped up with 12-year-old directness. "What do you mean, Grandma? Uncle Caleb is totally appropriate. He helps with homework and fixes things and makes Mason laugh when he's sad. And he tells the best stories," Mason added loyally. "Way better than anyone else's uncles." Sophia's expression softened when she looked at her grandchildren, but her voice remained pointed. "Of course, darlings. Uncle Caleb is wonderful. I just think it's important for your mother to branch out. Meet new people. David wouldn't want her to become too dependent on family. This story is touching so many hearts, and I want to invite you to be part of our growing family. If these passionate journeys speak to your soul, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Tomorrow brings another story of love conquering impossible odds, and I don't want you to miss it. Now, I have to ask, have you ever had to choose between what others expected and what your heart knew was right? Share your wisdom in the comments because your experiences light the way for others facing similar crossroads. The subtext was clear. Sophia suspected something was developing between Simone and Caleb, and she disapproved. The knowledge sat heavy in Simone's stomach for the rest of the meal. Later, as they were clearing dishes, Sophia cornered Caleb in the kitchen while Simone was in the bathroom with the children. "I need to speak with you," Sophia said without preamble. Caleb set down the plates he'd been rinsing and turned to face his mother. "About? About the way you're looking at David's wife. About the amount of time you're spending at her house. About the fact that my grandchildren are starting to see you as a father figure when their real father has been gone less than 2 years." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Caleb felt his jaw clench with the effort of maintaining his composure. "David asked me to take care of his family," he said carefully. "That's what I'm doing. Taking care of them, yes. But not replacing him. David was special, Caleb. He had a light that drew people to him, an energy that filled every room he entered. Simone loved him completely. She's vulnerable right now, and it would be wrong, cruel, even, to take advantage of that vulnerability." Each word hit like a physical blow. Caleb had spent 34 years living in David's shadow, hearing about David's superior qualities, being reminded that he was the backup brother, the consolation prize. To hear it now, when he'd finally found something that felt entirely his own, was devastating. "I would never take advantage of Simone," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Not intentionally, perhaps. But grief makes people do irrational things. Makes them reach for comfort in inappropriate places. Simone needs time to heal properly, not whatever this is you think is developing between you. And what if it's not grief?" The question escaped before Caleb could stop it. "What if what's developing between us is real?" Sophia's face hardened. "Then you're both deluding yourselves. She loved David, Caleb. Really, deeply, completely loved him. You look like him, you're safe and familiar, but you're not him. And eventually, she'll realize that. Don't put those children through the confusion of thinking you could ever be what their father was. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Every insecurity Caleb had ever harbored about his place in the world came rushing back. He was David's brother. David's consolation prize. David's understudy, forever waiting in the wings but never quite good enough for the starring role. "I know I'm not David," he said quietly. "Then act like you know it. Let Simone heal properly. Let her find someone new when she's ready, someone who won't constantly remind her of what she lost. The kindest thing you can do for that family is step back before you cause more damage." When Simone and the children returned to the kitchen, they found Caleb silent and withdrawn, his earlier warmth replaced by something that looked suspiciously like guilt and self-doubt. The drive home was quiet, the children sleepy in the back seat while Simone stole glances at Caleb's profile. Something had changed during those few minutes in Sophia's kitchen. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, in the way he gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly. "Fine," he said, but his voice lacked its usual warmth. At her house, he declined her invitation to come in for coffee, kissing the children goodnight on the porch instead of following them inside as he usually did. "About tonight," he said as Celeste and Mason disappeared into the house. "Maybe we should postpone that conversation. Give ourselves some time to think." Simone felt something cold settle in her stomach. Time to think, or time to convince ourselves this was a mistake? Maybe they're the same thing. The words hit like a physical blow. "Caleb, what happened at your mother's? What did she say to you?" "Nothing that wasn't true." His green eyes were shadowed with something that looked like pain. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Make sure you got home safe." But as she watched him drive away, Simone had the sinking feeling that tomorrow's call would be different. That whatever spell had been woven between them the night before was already beginning to unravel. Inside the house, as she tucked her children into bed and listened to their sleepy recounting of the day, Simone felt the walls of her carefully controlled life closing in around her once again. She'd allowed herself to hope, to dream, to imagine a future that looked different from the endless succession of solo days she'd been facing. But maybe Sophia was right. Maybe grief had made her reach for comfort in inappropriate places. Maybe she'd been deluding herself about what she and Caleb could be to each other. Maybe some promises really were meant to be kept, even when breaking them might lead to happiness. The thought made her chest tight with unshed tears and a loneliness that felt deeper than ever before. Chapter 5. October 15th. 2 years to the day since David's heart attack had stolen him from their lives in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Simone had marked the date on her calendar with a black X, dreading its approach like a approaching storm. She'd taken the day off work, knowing she'd be useless to her young patients when her own heart was breaking all over again. The children were at school, she'd debated keeping them home but decided routine was better than dwelling on grief, and the house felt cavernous with their absence. By noon, she'd cleaned everything twice, done 3 loads of laundry that didn't need washing, and reorganized closets that were already perfectly organized. Restless energy thrummed through her veins, demanding action, demanding purpose, demanding anything other than sitting still with her memories. That's when she decided to visit David's workshop. The garage had become a shrine of sorts. She'd barely touched it since his death, coming in only to retrieve seasonal decorations or garden tools. His projects sat exactly where he'd left them, a half-built birdhouse for Celeste, a toy chest for Mason that needed only sanding and staining, a rocking chair he'd been making for no particular reason except the joy of creating something beautiful with his hands. But today, she noticed something different. The toy chest had been moved, sanded smooth, and stained a rich honey color that brought out the natural grain of the wood. Delicate flowers had been carved into the front panel, not David's work, but something else entirely. Something that spoke of patient hours and careful attention to detail. Caleb. It had to be Caleb. "I thought I might find you here." She turned to find him standing in the doorway, backlit by afternoon sunshine. He wore his work clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt dusted with sawdust, and carried a steaming cup of coffee that smelled like the good stuff from the shop downtown. "Thought you might need this," he said, holding out the cup. "Black, 2 sugars." She accepted it gratefully, noting that he remembered exactly how she liked her coffee. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His voice was gentle but firm. "Today's hard enough without facing it alone." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping coffee and surrounded by the echoes of David's presence. But instead of feeling haunted, Simone found herself feeling peaceful. As if David's spirit approved of Caleb being here, of him taking care of the unfinished projects and the unfinished family. "You finished the toy chest," she observed. "Hope that's okay." "I know it was David's project, but Mason mentioned wanting somewhere special to keep his treasures, and..." Caleb shrugged, suddenly looking uncertain. "I can leave it unfinished if you'd prefer." "No." The word came out more forcefully than she'd intended. "No, it's beautiful. David would love what you did with it. He always said his projects needed someone with more patience than he had to make them truly special." She ran her fingers over the carved flowers, marveling at their delicate detail. "When did you do this?" "Evenings, mostly. After Jake complained that I was too distracted at work to be useful." Caleb set down his coffee and moved to stand beside her. "Working with my hands helps me think. And lately, I've had a lot to think about." The admission hung between them, loaded with everything they hadn't said since that night 2 weeks ago when Sophia's disapproval had driven a wedge between them. Since then, their interactions had been polite but distant. Caleb still came by to help with repairs and school events, but the easy intimacy they'd been building had disappeared behind careful walls. "Caleb," Simone began, then stopped. What could she say? That she missed the way he'd looked at her before guilt clouded his eyes? That she lay awake at night replaying their kiss and wondering if she'd imagined the connection between them? "I know," he said quietly, as if he could read her thoughts. "I've been pulling away. After what Mom said, I thought maybe she was right. Maybe I was taking advantage of your grief, trying to step into David's place when I have no right. And what do you think now?" Instead of answering immediately, Caleb moved to David's workbench and picked up a piece of paper that had been tucked beneath a wood plane. "I found this while I was working on the toy chest." It was in David's handwriting, tucked inside one of his project folders. He handed her the paper with trembling fingers. Simone recognized David's messy scrawl immediately, a letter that began with her name and ended with a signature she'd kissed 1,000 times. "My dearest Simone. If you're reading this, something's happened to me. I hope it was quick and I hope you know how much I loved you, completely, desperately, with every breath in my body. But here's the thing, beautiful, I'm writing this because I need you to know that loving me doesn't mean you stop living when I'm gone. It means you live twice as hard, twice as passionately, for both of us. I know you, sweetheart. I know you'll try to turn yourself into some kind of monument to our marriage, preserving everything exactly as it was, afraid that moving forward means forgetting. But forgetting was never the danger, not living fully was. Take care of our babies, but don't sacrifice your happiness for some misguided idea of loyalty. Find love again. Find joy again. Find someone who sees how extraordinary you are and isn't intimidated by the depth of your capacity to love. And Caleb, if you're reading this too, stop living in my shadow, brother. You've spent your whole life thinking you were second choice, but you're not. You never were. You're just different from me, and different doesn't mean less. Simone will need time, but when she's ready, don't let guilt stop either of you from living. Love her the way she deserves, completely, honestly, without apology. The kids need a father figure, but more than that, they need to see what real love looks like. Show them. I'm not giving you permission because you don't need it. I'm giving you my blessing because I love you both too much to see you waste your lives on misplaced loyalty to a dead man. Live, both of you. Live beautifully. All my love, David. Simone's hands shook as she read the letter, tears streaming down her face with each word. This was David's voice, not the idealized saint she'd been trying to honor, but the man who'd known her heart better than she knew it herself. He knew, she whispered, looking up at Caleb through her tears. Somehow, he knew this would happen. Caleb's face was pale, his green eyes bright with unshed tears. I've been carrying this guilt for so long, thinking I was betraying him by wanting you. But he wanted us to find each other. Not just wanted, Simone said, her voice growing stronger as the words sank in. He planned it. He knew you'd take care of us, and he knew that caring would grow into something more. He wasn't just asking you to watch over his family, Caleb. He was asking you to become part of it. The letter fluttered to the workbench as Caleb moved closer, his hands hovering near her face as if afraid to touch. Are you sure? He asked quietly. Because once I stop fighting this, once I let myself love you the way I've been wanting to, there's no going back. I can't pretend anymore that you're just David's widow or just my nephew's mother. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours, and everything changes. Everything's already changed, she said, reaching up to cover his hands with hers. It changed the night you held me while I cried. It changed when you kissed me like I was precious instead of broken. It changed when I realized that loving you doesn't diminish what I had with David, it honors it. This time, when he kissed her, there was no hesitation, no guilt, no holding back. This was a kiss that claimed and cherished, that spoke of forever instead of stolen moments. Simone felt herself melting into him, into the promise of a future she'd been afraid to imagine. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in the golden afternoon light filtering through the garage windows. I love you, Caleb said, the words rough with emotion. I've loved you for so long I can't remember what it felt like not to love you. I love you too, she whispered back, the admission feeling like coming home. Not because you remind me of David, but because you're nothing like him. Because you're patient where he was impetuous, gentle where he was intense, steady where he was ambitious. Because you see me, really see me, and think I'm worth loving exactly as I am. They might have stayed like that forever, lost in each other and the miraculous gift of David's blessing, but the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway broke the spell. The kids, Simone said, suddenly remembering that Celeste and Mason would be home from school soon. Are you ready for this? Caleb asked. For them to know that this is real? Simone thought about her children's innocent questions about marriage and family, about the way they already looked to Caleb as a father figure, about how natural it had felt to have him in their home every day. I think they've been ready longer than we have, she said with a smile. They walked out of the garage hand in hand, blinking in the bright October sunshine. Caleb's pickup truck sat in the driveway next to her sedan, and for the first time, the sight of it there felt like exactly where it belonged. Inside the house, they could hear the children's voices, Celeste helping Mason with homework at the kitchen table, their easy chatter filling the space with life and love and possibility. Uncle Caleb. Mason spotted them first, launching himself from his chair for his usual enthusiastic hug. Did you see Mom? She's been sad all day because of the anniversary, but now she looks happy again. I see her, Caleb said, catching Simone's eye over Mason's head. She looks beautiful. Are you staying for dinner? Celeste asked hopefully. We're having spaghetti, and you know Mom always makes too much. If you'll have me, Caleb said, but he was looking at Simone as he said it. Always, she replied, and the word carried the weight of forever. 2 weeks later, Mason's school held its annual fall festival, complete with pumpkin carving, apple bobbing, and a talent show that showcased the questionable abilities of 8-year-olds with more enthusiasm than skill. Simone sat in the elementary school auditorium, Caleb's arm around her shoulders as they watched Mason perform a magic trick that involved making a rubber ball disappear behind his back. It was the first time they'd appeared together publicly as a couple, and Simone was acutely aware of the curious glances from other parents. "He's going to drop that ball," Caleb murmured in her ear, his breath warm against her cheek. "He's going to be devastated if he does," Simone whispered back. But Mason managed to complete his trick without major disaster, beaming as the audience applauded politely. As he took his bow, he spotted his family in the crowd and waved enthusiastically. "That's my mom and my new dad," he announced into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "They got married in their hearts." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd, along with more than a few speculative looks in their direction. Simone felt her cheeks burn, but Caleb just squeezed her shoulders and grinned. "Married in our hearts," he repeated quietly. "I like that. Mason has such an interesting way of interpreting the world," Simone said weakly. "He's not wrong, though," Caleb said, his voice serious despite his smile. "We might not have had a ceremony yet, but this feels married to me. This feels like forever." The word "yet" hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and promise. After the show, as they were gathering their coats and preparing to leave, Sophia appeared at their row. Simone tensed, expecting disapproval or confrontation, but Sophia's expression was carefully neutral. "The children seem happy," she said without preamble. "They are," Simone replied cautiously. "Mason's been talking about his new dad for weeks now. Celeste mentioned that Caleb helped her with a science project that earned her an A+. Simone waited for the criticism, the lecture about appropriate boundaries and family expectations. Instead, Sophia sighed deeply. "David would be pleased, I think. He always said his children's happiness was more important than anything else." The admission seemed to cost her something, but she pressed on. "I may not understand this arrangement, but I can see that it's working. The children are thriving, and you." She looked at Simone with something that might have been grudging respect. "You look alive again. Like yourself instead of just David's widow." It wasn't exactly a blessing, but it wasn't condemnation either. For Sophia, it was practically an embrace. "Thank you," Simone said quietly. Sophia nodded stiffly, then surprised them both by addressing Caleb directly. "Don't hurt them," she said simply. "They've been through enough." "Never," Caleb replied, his voice steady with conviction. "They're my family now. I'll protect them with my life." Something shifted in Sophia's expression, a recognition, perhaps, of the depth of Caleb's commitment. She nodded once more and walked away, leaving them staring after her in amazement. "Did we just get Sophia's blessing?" Simone asked incredulously. "I think we got something even better," Caleb said. "We got her acceptance." That night, after the children were tucked into bed with their heads full of carnival cotton candy and their hearts full of pride from successful performances, Simone and Caleb found themselves back in the living room where their journey had really begun. "So," Caleb said, settling beside her on the couch with natural ease. "Mason thinks we're married in our hearts." 8-year-olds have interesting perspectives on relationship status, Simone said, but she was smiling. "What if he's not wrong?" Caleb turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "What if we made it official? Not just for the kids, but for us. For the future we want to build together." Simone's heart stuttered in her chest. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you'd marry me," Caleb said simply. "Not because David wanted me to take care of you, not because the kids need a father figure, but because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Because I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Because I want to be your husband and their father and the man who gets to love this amazing family forever." Tears pricked her eyes as she looked at this man who'd stepped out of his brother's shadow to become exactly what she needed, exactly what they all needed. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." Not because David gave us his blessing, not because it's practical or convenient, but because I choose you. Because you choose us. Because this love we found, it's ours, and it's real, and it's worth celebrating. When he kissed her this time, it tasted like promises and forever and the kind of happy ending she'd stopped believing in. Outside, autumn wind rustled through the oak tree David had planted when Celeste was born, and somewhere in that whisper of leaves, Simone could swear she heard his laughter, warm with approval and joy. They'd honored his memory by learning to live again. They'd kept his promise by becoming the family he'd dreamed of, not a replacement for what was lost, but a beautiful evolution of what love could become when it was given room to grow. Some promises, Simone realized, were kept not by holding on, but by letting go. Not by staying the same, but by becoming something new and wonderful and impossibly right. And as Caleb held her close in the living room where their love had first bloomed, she knew that David's greatest gift hadn't been his love for her, it had been his wisdom in knowing that love, real love, multiplies rather than diminishes. That opening your heart to new possibilities doesn't erase the past, it honors it by creating a future worth living. The brothers' promise had been kept. Their family was safe, loved, and whole in ways they'd never imagined possible. And tomorrow, they would start planning a wedding that celebrated not just their love, but the beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect way that families can grow and change and flourish when love leads the way. Beautiful souls, your stories of love, loss, and second chances fill my heart every day. Have you ever discovered that what felt like betrayal was actually a blessing in disguise? Have you learned that love has room to grow in directions you never imagined? Share your journey in the comments. Your courage inspires others to open their hearts to unexpected possibilities. If this story touched your heart, show some love with a like, it helps others find these healing stories. Subscribe to join our family of beautiful hearts sharing love's journey together. Turn on notifications so you never miss when love conquers the impossible odds. Tomorrow, we explore another passionate journey of hearts finding each other against all expectations. Until then, remember, your heart knows the way, even when your mind can't see the path. Keep believing in love's power to transform, heal, and surprise us with its perfect timing. You are loved, you are worthy, and your story of love, in whatever form it takes, matters.